Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by for this latest episode of Good Trouble, the series where I engage in difficult conversations above our gaming tables with a spirit of education and compassion. This episode is a conversation that I had with designer Sen-Foong Lim on the Stop Asian Hate movement as it has played out in the board gaming community. It is actually part 2 of a conversation that also occurs on this channel, Shelf Stories, where we get into issues of online moderation, and the Stop Asian Hate movement discussion came out of that first discussion. You can either go back to that first episode and listen to them both together, or you can listen to this one alone. There is a lot here. And Sen in particular was amazing, gave a lot of information, a lot of education. So please sit down with your ears open and enjoy our conversation. So without further ado, enjoy the show. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you are like, so I cleared this with you beforehand.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to put this on you if you didn't want to, and you were gracious and you said, okay, let's go for it.
Let's go for it.
So like Sen has a particular thing in mind, I assume, right? And now, like, we're recording this the week of what's
it's today? March 18th.
March 18th. We're recording that week, and earlier the week we had a incident of who knows if it's called a hate crime yet, but it is in reality a hate crime, right?
Yeah.
Where a white man in Atlanta shot up a massage parlor that was staffed by Asian women, and many of them died. Or
he had a bad day.
So then, right? Okay, we went right forward, sure.
I mean,
so okay, so that this, and I think people know the circumstances, but I don't want to take that for granted. He went and shot a bunch of people. Many Asian women died, right?
Yes.
Mostly women. I think it was 8 people total, and most of them were Asian women.
Yeah.
So then
75% of them were.
Right. So then, the person is taken into custody, and the police chief is asking him questions, like, and asking him, was this so racially motivated? And the guy's like, no. So the police chief is called, okay, of course it's not racially motivated. He said it was no. And then says the whole thing. Goes in the presser. He has a bad day, and like the Asian community feel just that's where hashtag Stop Asian Hate has reemerged, and just. I don't know, like, I mean, this isn't, so obviously it's not my space, right? But I care. I care a lot. I mean, and it's for a lot of reasons. And I indicated a little bit because I grew up right up the block from Chinatown, and Asians have always been in my life in various ways. So I care, and so I just wanted to, I don't know, Sen, like, what is your, like, what message do you want to kind of get out about this?
Oh, wow. I mean, whether or not this particular act gets labeled as a hate crime or not, I think the understanding of the intersectionality of it all is, I mean, let's bring in critical race theory. If you really want to, we can do that. Where you have the intersection.
I get a lot of pushback from that, actually.
Yeah.
People are like, you're a critical race theorist. I don't like what you're saying.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe they should study it. Maybe they could actually study it and figure out, like, and point out, without, resorting to using talking points from somebody else.
Right.
If you can articulate to me why it's bad, okay. You don't have to do anything with it. I can articulate why it's good, or why it's useful, why it's a useful lens to look at things.
I think that's how I come at it. Useful. It's not the only lens.
Oh gosh,
but it is a useful lens.
So for anybody out there who's not like a therapist or not in psychology or anything like that, we have like what's called theories of practices, and then we have modalities, and we have all these things. And a theory of practice is literally just a lens to look at a problem at and to try to explain it. And we normally don't just look at it from one lens. That's a pretty limited viewpoint, right? We look at it from multiple lenses. My specific lens, I'm a developmental, I work with kids, right? So I look at things very much from a developmentalist perspective, but also from a behaviorist perspective. Those are usually my two major field, my two major lenses, my two major theoretical fields. Plus, then I look at it from like, constructivist theory, or from, social construct learning, whatever it is. we have tools to look at things by. And critical race theory is just one of many, many tools. It just happens to fit really well for some of the things that are being discussed in today's day and age. And this is one of them. When you have misogyny, right?
Right.
And when you have race involved, it's probably a hate crime.
Right. And
when 75% of the victims are women and 75% of them are Asian, and they didn't go to any other, the person who shot up these spas did not go to any, I don't know, other places where other people of other colors who are also, in the sex trade work. I mean, you got to question that.
Yeah. So like for me, it's like, okay, legally there's a whole thing, but like in terms of like how we talk about it, like I think the question you want to ask is, could this have happened to anybody? Like, could this have happened in any, different places and different people like around the country or whatever it is?
That's a great way to look at it.
Really, and the answer is no.
Right.
Partly because, it was, so like Asian women, right? Asian women in particular have a very strong stereotype of submissive, desirable, exotic, like
it's fetishization,
existing to please in a way that many other women are not. They like it plays out differently among in the Asian population. And I saw this firsthand when I was traveling, and I was a student in college. I was traveling. I went to Thailand, and just like right off the plane, it's a bunch of white businessmen with their sandals and whatever, like walking around with Thai women.
Yeah, and really young Thai women.
Really, really young Thai women. Like they're there for that. And they're there for the stereotype, and they're there to be allured by that. But when I was that age, they called it yellow fever.
They still do.
Okay, yeah.
It's still called that.
So like, and maybe the person wasn't conscious of it. So that's where you bring an implicit bias, which is where my thing is from. So like, was he conscious of it? No. And I'm a psychodynamic therapist. So like my thing is, okay, it was operating in the back of his mind that he was operating like this is what he wanted. And like, he wanted, I don't know what he wanted, but like, there's a reason that was the draw. Right. And there's a reason those places exist and play out the way they do.
Yes. So, I mean, if we're getting into the case study, from what I know anyways, is what he said was, I have a sex addiction, and this was my way to eliminate the temptation.
And so the question is this relevant to the Asian community? Should the Asian community feel aggrieved by this? Should they be hurt by this? And the answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Absolutely yes. And if the links aren't apparent, then you just have to dive a little bit deeper, connect a few more of the dots. But yes, the Asian community should be aggrieved by this.
And it's really interesting when people say, "Oh, gay, you listen to him. He's telling you the truth." It's like, well, I don't know about that. But also, when the police chief, he just had a bad day, and this is what he did. I'm sure, Jason, you've had a bad day. Have you killed 8 people? I mean, no, neither have I. We've had bad days. We have bad days. Everybody has bad days. And did we kill people of a specific race, culture? No, we didn't kill anybody. Just get that out there right now. But if we did, is it going to be of that race and of that culture? The 2 people who are not Korean or Chinese that were killed, I think they were Johns. I think they were there by mistake or by they're purposely there, but they were there in that space.
Right.
Yeah, they weren't shot because they were anything. They were just shot. They just happened to be there. But the other people, they're guaranteed to be there. Right? They work there. That's right. And they actually lived there, a lot of them. And so the interesting thing, it's not even interesting, it's sad, with a lot of those massage parlors, is that these are very poor people who are looked down upon by even people in their own cultures. We think about sex work as this horrible thing that needs to go away, and that's pretty cross-cultural. That's not something that is just puritanical people. That is like across most cultures. There's some places where it's more accepted, some places where it's, legalized, or some places where it's, accepted to the point where they create space. So, but there's still that identification. Like, you want to call somebody, a woman, a bad word, call her a whore. Right. That's one of the worst words you can call somebody. And why is it that way? So anyway, within the Asian culture and within that, a lot of people who work in the sex trade are literally, like, unfortunately, like, thrown away from that culture. And I think that what we might see from this is, if nothing comes from this dude, whatever happens to him, I mean, at least I hope that some people sort of see what is happening to, the less fortunate people of any culture. Part of the problem with racism and Asian people is that Asians have this weird kind of place, this weird.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the model minority myth. If you really want to get into it.
You are oppressing me, sir. You are bringing the Puerto Ricans and the Latinos and everybody else down. You're making us look bad.
Well, I mean, that's part of it, right? And to be honest, I am a picture of the model minority myth. I am literally the poster child for the model minority myth.
I don't know. How good are you at math?
Real good.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Actually, I'm not that good anymore, but I'm highly educated. My parents came here with nothing and made something for themselves, and all that kind of stuff. All those model minority myths that you hear. And what you don't hear about Asian people is that while there are a lot of people statistically who make more than the average wage in America and Canada, who are Asian, there are also a whole bunch underneath that, like way underneath that, living in poverty. The model minority myth actually hurts a lot of people, like that whole math question, right? Are you good at math? It's just assumed. And so when somebody isn't good at math, who's Asian, what happens? When somebody, isn't, anything that stereotypically we're supposed to be good at, what happens then? Or doesn't act like somebody who's stereotypically Asian. And this happens with everybody who's stereotyped, by the way. It's just the model minority myth. You wouldn't think it's hurtful because it's all positive stuff. Oh, you guys make more money. You're all doctors and, engineers and, and those who own their own businesses and have like restaurants and whatever. Let me tell you about those in a second. But where the history, if you want a history lesson on this, I'll give you one. Why there are so many.
Teach me.
Why there are so many restaurants and laundromats and all that kind of stuff in my culture and the history of my people is because it's emasculating. So there was a time in American and Canadian history where legally we actually couldn't do anything else but. And it's a systemic thing to emasculate Chinese males in the eyes of white Anglo-Saxon females. There was a point in law, like this is legally in the law around the time of, anywhere from the late 1800s into like 1943. It's not too long ago. When if you were it's called miscegenation, when there's mixing of races. And if you were an Asian male, you couldn't hire an unwed white female to work for you. Why? Because you're a yellow devil who's going to make mixed race babies and pollute that white woman. Right. And so there's a lot of laws on the books that you should look into if you don't understand just how, oppressed that different people of different cultures were. And this is not an oppression Olympics. I'm not saying, Chinese people and Japanese people and Korean people and Thai people and Laotian people. And by the way, Southeast Asians are still Asians, right? People from India are still Asian. So don't just think about the light-skinned Asians from East Asia. I mean, that's usually what people think of is Chinese, Japanese, Korean. But Asia is a huge place. Didn't know if you knew this, but it's huge. And So a lot of the laws originally were to try to keep Chinese people from staying, from keeping jobs, from having children and families, right? Once you put down a family, you have roots in that area. And once you have roots, and also that baby who's born in America or Canada now has rights.
Is a citizen. It's a citizen, yep, in America.
Scary thought for all the other people. So they made laws. They put a head tax where you had to pay to come to Canada if you were Chinese. And obviously, I mean, the most egregious are things like the internment camps, right? I mean, horrifying. So there's a long and storied history, and there's a lot of reasons why things were done. None of them good. And I mean, this goes back to game design. If you really want to know, this is why I wrote Jiangshi, because it's a testament to my ancestors, really. And I'm not related to any of them, but I feel for them because I still feel the ramifications of their pain and struggle today.
Right.
Like, seriously, I do. I still feel in some ways that, there is some sort of weird second-class citizenness to being a person of color in a very progressive country like Canada, right? And that everything that they went through and did to get where we are today so that I can live, I can, marry a person who I love, whatever their skin color might be. That's the pain and suffering that I wanted to write about in that book, in that game. And it's a game because I want people to experience it. I want people to understand what it could have been like back then, because it's not revisionist at all. It's like bad things happen, and there's racism and there's oppression, and the hopping vampires, the Jiangshi in the story, are actually, they're written in as a stand-in for racism, pretty much. They are basically a corollary. It's allegorical. So the idea, though, in terms of historical oppression and things like that, when you see the model minority myth now lived out in, oh, you all get into Harvard and we have to actually stop you from getting into Harvard or whatever, it is harmful in a lot of ways. Like, stereotypes are just generally harmful. When you think about heuristics, when you think about stereotypes, when you think about tropes, they're really just quick ways to make judgment calls so you can do things, right? That's all they are.
Right.
And in and of themselves.
To do things across races, right? So I had this whole thing of like, when you are, let's like among the in-group, you are neurologically predisposed to being more familiar and being more like affiliative and being, understanding facial features. This is neurological. This is not like quote unquote racism. This is all like just how neurology work. And so like, so if I'm amongst, my peoples, and if, white people among white people, like it all like works out. Right. So then now you're going across races, and we can't, like, our brains just aren't equipped naturally to recognize, like the other race effect, like, oh, y'all, all Chinese look the same, and all the, whatever. And you, all Americans look the same. Like, that's the other race effect is, again, psychological. Yeah. So then we have to fill in that gap, that understanding gap, and we fill the gap in with stereotypes.
Yes. And the interesting thing is that some of that's true and some of that's weirdly untrue. Not untrue in the fact that it's not true, but untrue for me personally, right? And for a lot of people who grew up, like I grew up as one of maybe 20 Chinese people in a town of 80,000. So I don't think all white people are the same. It's because I was completely inundated with white people.
It doesn't have to be true. Like it
doesn't. No, right, exactly.
It's neuroplasticity. Like we can learn to be like, to affiliate across races, but that has to be learned.
Yes, it is
over experiences. It isn't just going to happen.
Right. And it's just like, so a really easy example is, if somebody is visually impaired from birth and we can correct that, they're still going to have a hard time recognizing faces even when they're adults, because the learning process for that happens when you're a baby. Right. So all that kind of facial recognition, of pattern, of eye tracking, all that stuff happens when you're really young. And so a lot of people who grow up with visual impairments and get them corrected over time, they're still, even if they have really good vision, they still have difficulty remembering people's faces. And that's just neuropsychology. That's all that is. It's like your brain is learning stuff. And so a lot of it, and this isn't to say like racism is genetic, because it's not. It's not. But there are parts of things that are genetic, or at least related to development,
Yes.
and who you develop around.
And I think racism is when we approach our neurology uncritically.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I like that.
So like when we have the neurological biases, and I'm big on education about that. Like, I don't accuse people of racism, because a lot of times this is just, they're just acting on stuff, right? And so like when you either like are confronted with it and you choose not to like redress what is happening, or when you actually change your brain to be more racist, which happens over time, which some people do.
Hopefully less, but yes, it can go the other way.
So like, that's what we mean by racism. Like, the stuff like, okay, like seeing other people's races, or, like, that's not necessarily, it's just like all neurologist stuff. And now, so it's like, now we're talking about the Asian community. And, we have a group of people who are coming over, and their faces look different, and just everything about them looks different. And I think the Asian community, and it kind of shares this with the Black community in a way that it did. Like, I don't, but like Blacks and Asians are coded in America as non-assimilable.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
You don't assimilate. Like, these are the groups that won't assimilate. Like, in a way, like, the Irish came over, they assimilated. The Italians came over, they became white. How the Irish became white was a famous book, right? So like, they weren't always considered white. It was always like, they're the Irish, but they assimilated. And the Eastern Europeans came in, they assimilated. Asians, for whatever historical reason, just always foreigners.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, part of it's definitely language. Right. There's a lot of language and cultural stuff that just doesn't make sense, and is very difficult to kind of erase from that. And it's why things like Chinatowns exist, right? I mean, but there's all sorts of little places, like there's little Italies, and there's, all sorts of little enclaves of things. But for some reason, the
disappear.
Yes,
like Chinatowns just tend to disappear. Like right now, Little Italy in New York is like a block.
Yeah, right.
Street, but like Chinatown persists. The Chinatown ain't going nowhere.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's lots of history about Chinatowns and how they tried to get rid of them, of course. But it's an interesting thing that it's this perception of the other as alien, right? That is definitely othering and definitely diminishing, and definitely allows things like somebody to come in and shoot people because they don't think they're people, right? To this person who shot other people, that was just a way to get rid of temptation. So what are they? They're temptrists. They're temptation to me. They're not people. If they were people, maybe he wouldn't have shot them if he thought of them as people, but he thought of them as his temptation. So I don't know. It's a weird thing going on right now. And like I said, whatever happens to this particular person, the community is visibly upset, is like shaken to the core, really, in a lot of ways. And it's interesting, some of the reactions that you see online in terms of, some people are saying, well, now you know what it feels like, if not in a bad way, just like now you understand, right? It's like, I think we always understood. We just never had a voice that was as loud as, say, Black Twitter. Because now that a lot of people on Twitter, like Asian Twitter, is just in an uproar. Well, Asian American Twitter, API Twitter, is really like, what's going on? And a lot of people on Black Twitter are like, yeah, so now you get it. It's like, no, we always got it, but this is the moment. This is the galvanizing moment for us. And it's really hard because, I mean, a lot of older Asian people, while big R racism is really, that systemic stuff, there's definitely prejudice. There's definitely prejudice in Asian cultures against a lot of people. Like my dad would say this about anybody, anybody who's not Asian, pretty much. Yeah. It's like, oh, they're third class citizens living in a first class world, is what he would say about pretty much anybody in Canada and the United States who's not Asian. Like he says, like, you have all this in front of you. Why aren't you doing good things with it? is what he thinks from his mentality, right? So there's definitely some barriers to break down amongst a lot of the old guard in terms of culture, in terms of racism, internalized racism, even right between or lateral violence between groups that are ostensibly going to be looked at the same, right? But then they get played off against each other,
And that's
and
the thing,
whatnot.
like, but when we talk about like white supremacy, that's I don't like that term because it says means KKK, and it's like people think of it as KKK, and it's like that's not how we mean it. How we mean it as a dominant culture that kind of uses the cleavages between groups and makes them fight, and so
Yeah.
that way that helps like the powers that be kind of stay in power, like when we're fighting.
Yes. Yeah. And that, I mean, that was a big call over the last little bit of the American election cycle, where it's like, why are we fighting if we're divided? That's what they want. But I don't know who was doing that rallying. So
Yeah, right now.
yeah, I don't know who's really talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so yeah, the lateral violence is a thing. The prejudice between racial groups, even that aren't, of the majority, is a thing. And one thing that I think, we talked about this, not you and I, but I talked about this during Black Lives Matter, during like the initial push to the Asian community. It's like, hey, I hope you realize that we're where we are in a lot of ways because of the work that the Black American activists did, during social reform times. And without them doing the work, we wouldn't be able to be the model minority. Right. So we owe a lot to the work that was done in that way. And it's such an interesting thing. Like, we are so, what's the word? The model minority myth oppresses us in a lot of ways to the point where, a lot of Asians aren't willing to give up that status, to make noise, to do that. Like Andrew Yang, oh my gosh, Andrew Yang at one point, I can't quote exactly what he said, but he said something like, show the Americans that Asians are good, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to look up the quote because it was actually worse than that.
Mm.
But it's like, dude, are you asking us to play to the model minority myth? Is that what you're asking us to do?
Mm-hmm.
Because it sounds like that's what you're asking us to do. Like, you're asking us to be good, subservient Asian people.
Yes. Yeah. Those good subservient Asian people who kind of take stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's
we'll
like,
take it and live with the criticism,
right,
but still be good producers and, still achieve and still show, because we're often held up as the example of, well, if they can do it, why can't you? Right. And like you said, you're making us look bad.
Making us
right. Well, that's
No,
that division.
like
right.
I went to
that cleavage.
I went to Stuyvesant High School in New York City. So the Stuyvesant High School for the gifted and talented, right?
Yeah.
And at the time in the 90s, it was
I went in the 80s, so
it was 50% Asian.
Yeah.
And there were 2 Puerto Ricans, me and Juan Ortiz, of course. And
hey, Juan.
And hi, Juan. let's talk. And then we, now you going on, and it's like, now if you go to Stuyvesant in 20, however, still math and science, still gets the girls gifted, even more higher percentage of Asians than the Blacks and Puerto Ricans are not even there.
Is it?
Something, yeah, it's crazy.
Oh, that's too bad.
It's gotten worse.
It's interesting.
So it's like, they're a minority. Why can't you do it? It be as our people. So like, and that's the work that I used to do in social work. Cause like, living in Sunset Park, all these different cultures and Chinese are right there next to the Spanish people. Yeah. And like, we had to navigate that because there was a lot of like resentment from our part.
For sure.
Towards like, you're taking what could be ours and you're like, you're impressing them. And it's like, and it took a lot of work to be like, what, this isn't helping. Right. Like, we need to, this benefits people when we fight.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, how do we make things not a zero-sum game if you want to talk game theory? And that's part of the problem. A lot of racism, sexism, all the isms, transphobia, all this stuff, a lot of it stems from, the human psychological need or construct of a zero-sum game. Like, people just think if I'm not winning, I'm losing.
Right.
Or if I'm not getting two things and somebody else gets those two things, I've got nothing. It's like, well, no, wait a minute. No. Is that true? Or do you still have two things? And they also have two things, right? There's enough of pretty much everything to go around, except for that exact one thing that you wanted. Right. And then the question comes, well, did you really deserve that thing? Or did this other person deserve that one thing?
And should that one thing even exist? That one thing
Yeah.
being like cultural dominance.
Right.
Right.
Or whatever it is. It could be something like a spot in a master's program at Harvard or Yale or whatever Ivy is the best Ivy to go to. I don't even know or care. I just don't. I think it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I went to city school, so I'm all my life I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good. And that's not resentment towards them. It's just I don't get it. I'm not American, so I don't understand the wonders of an Ivy League school. But
take us too far afield. That'll be another podcast. I'll explain. Podcast. I got a lot to say about higher education, but you can go ahead.
The idea, anyways, behind the fact that are there only that many spots? There doesn't have to be that many spots. There could be more spots. Why aren't there more spots? Right. Why do you make people compete for such limited resources when that is sometimes driving division? And can we do this in a different way where everybody can win? The difference between equality and equity and all that kind of stuff. Those are some things that I think people should think about. What is the difference between equality? What is the difference between equity? And what do you really want out of this? Is it equal chance, but not equal outcomes? That's what a lot of people will say. Oh, I think everybody should have equal chance, but I don't believe in equal outcomes. I believe in a meritocracy. And I just laugh at them because meritocracy is inherently rigged. Currently, anyway. I mean, maybe in 50 years it won't be rigged, but currently, a lot of stuff when you talk about meritocracy is fairly rigged because there's no true one variable meritocracy. So I'll give you a little psychology here and tell you that in mathematics, in learning of math, everybody is equal, whether you're female or male or anything in between or non-binary. Everybody has equal capacity to learn math pretty much, regardless of gender is what I'm saying. Until you get to the highest levels of academia, like the highest levels of academia, and then it's shifted towards males. Mm-hmm. And my question is why? Why is that? And I ask my students this all the time. Like every year I ask them the same question. So why do you think that is? And they're going, oh, maybe it's genetic. It's like, well, really, is it? Is this genetic? Or is this that there aren't as many women at that stage, or that women never are allowed to get to that stage? There are many, I have international students. I say, hey, in your country, I bet you 2 generations ago, women didn't go to school. So how can we know if this is true, genetically true, or if it's a social construct, whether it's like socially driven, because there were definitely times when women did not go to school. And so the idea that, we're taking away stuff by giving stuff to make equal opportunity or equitable opportunity, or whatever word you want to use, whichever E word you want to use, they're actually kind of different. So look it up. Right. But if you are trying to say that, this is a zero-sum game and that, me getting a job stops you from getting a job, it really doesn't. It stops you from getting that job, but you can get a job. But I wanted that job. Well, why do you deserve that job any more than another person deserved that job? Well, if you weren't, Black, Latin, Chinese, whatever, you wouldn't have been even in line because it's,
Affirmative action. Yes.
And it's an interesting thought. I mean, is that true? Maybe. But it's this interesting place where
we can
is it really zero sum?
We can even relate it to speech, and we'll bring it back to our first part of our discussion, where people think that when we say you can't say a thing, right? And in the Asian American community, because we're centering that for this conversation, in the Asian American community, We do not want people to say kung flu. We do
No.
not want people to call others coronavirus. We do
Yeah.
not want to, just highlight fortune cookies. And I think Danny Plays Game had an awesome thread about like what was an Asian spell compendium, and it was
Oh,
like
jeez.
magical
Yeah.
chopsticks and
Yeah. That was actually literally from a company's, what was it? Mysteries of the Orient,
right, Mysteries of Orient. Oh
D&D
my god.
supplement or something. And it's like,
Right.
they obviously didn't have a consultant.
every flagrant Asian stereotype, right? And
Yeah.
so like so then you have the people that say you can't take away people's ability to say these things because we'll end up
No.
with less speech. And that speaks to the zero sum point that you made. Like,
Yeah.
if you take away my ability, I have less words. And it's like, well, I think I'm removing a weed so that other things can grow and you can
Yeah.
have more words.
Yeah.
That's our perspective.
Yeah. Or you can have better words. There's better words out there. You can find
Right.
them, use them. Right. You don't have to
words.
rely on all
trillions
those
of
old
words. Just come up with different ones.
Yeah. Well, that's it, right? It's like, well, that's the whole idea the four gates are. I might want to tell you to F off, but I've got better words to use. And this is not to say that swearing is bad. I just don't swear. That's not my thing. But if you want to swear, if you're mad and you're going to swear, swear. And that's for Suze, by the way. Suze, I love you. You can totally swear. I don't know if she'll see this, but no, seriously.
Now she will.
Well, okay. So here's the deal. Suze is a very good friend of mine. She's Asian American.
Suzanne Sheldon, in case case it's not clear.
And people were lambasting her for swearing about this event, this massacre. It's a massacre. Like, let's not mince words.
The terrorist attack.
Dead people. Yes. It's horrible. And she was swearing about it. Like, she's like, I'm effing this and I'm upset. And the people were literally tone policing her. Oh, would Tom think this was good for you to say? It's like, this isn't Tom's account. This isn't a Dice Tower account. I don't care.
Right.
I'm allowed to be angry. Right. Well, right. And yes, there are better words, but allow people to be angry, to vent their emotions when it's done. It's not done at anybody. It's not saying like, you're a fucking idiot. Oh, sorry. I don't know if we can swear on this, but you can bleep that out later. And it's not saying that. It's saying she is effing upset about the situation or whatever it was. I don't even remember. But that's the point. It wasn't about a person, right? And I talked to this about like all the kids that I work with. It's like, look, I get that you're going to swear. If you swear, as long as it's not about a person, we're good. If it's about, you're angry about a situation, if it's about, you stub your toe, fine, right. Whatever.
Oh, by the way, this is a Good Trouble episode. So in Good Trouble, I put the explicit label on there, so you're good.
Yeah. So, but as soon as you start, labeling other people or denigrating other people with your words, then we've got a problem, right? That's all it is. That's really all it is. So a swear by itself is nothing. It's how it's used. It's a tool, right? It's just like any other piece of language. You can find better words for sure, but maybe right now this is the word you need for that. Which is very different than, using racial epithets. Why?
Because racial epithets, as opposed to curse words, racial epithets have a tether to actions where people are pretty naive about that. Where it's like, well, if I say that, or like, that what was that one Kickstarter where the guy had like a, he had the Asian thing and he had like a weird box. I think it was Ping Yao or something.
Oh, and he wore, and it was Ping Yao, and it was a content creator from Italy who kind of dressed up in a quasi costume, but then put on the Fu Manchu beard, mustache beard thing, and then it was like had squinty eyes and stuff like that, and people called him out, and he's like, but it was just funny. It's like, not to me, it's not. And there's other ways to do things without dressing up like people's cultures in an offensive way. Like seriously, my wife wore a qipao. She's not Chinese, but she wore qipao at our wedding because that's what you do. And she was beautiful. And it was an homage to my culture, right? Because we got married in Canada. So we did a whole bunch of Canadian things. We didn't do very many Chinese things. So, there's a difference between, appropriation, appreciation, and straight out disrespect.
Right.
And, if somebody tells you if somebody from that culture, from that race, I hate the word race, but whatever, if anybody like that tells you that, hey, that's kind of racist or that's offensive, you should probably listen to them because they probably know. They probably know better than you. Right. And it's such an interesting thing.
It leads to worse stuff. Like that's the thing that I know I'm kind of repeating myself, but I feel like that's teaching, right? Teaching is repetition. You have to drill it into people when they don't really know that, allowing the Asian spell compendium or the Oriental spell compendium or whatever it is, and allowing, these things, like there is a direct link in our, speaking of gaming, there's a direct link, if we allow that stuff, to what happened in Georgia. And maybe it's like 17 moves, and maybe it's hard
tenuous
to see
sometimes. Yeah,
but like
it's
you connect some dots, and you include your concept of implicit bias and stereotyping, and in this case it would be like the stereotype of the female Asian submissive, and but is that far? Because the female submissive, he may have learned that in a game, or in anime. It isn't that far when you really look at this stuff. And so that's why we police it so hard, or when we get such a guttural reaction to it. And, this podcast is an attempt to educate in compassion, like I always try to do, but this will not stop. We will not stop talking about this stuff.
No. And that's the thing. I mean, people want us to stop talking about it because it makes their life easier, because then they can say what they want to say. And that's the thing, is that you can. There may be consequences. I'm never going to say that you can't say that unless you're my kid. Are you my kid? No, then you can say whatever you want, but just don't expect me to sit down and not say anything about it or do something about that.
Yeah, people think free speech means say it and then not get anything said back to you. And that's not free speech.
The funniest thing is about people who complain about or say that you're treading on their free speech. It's like, well, no, wait a minute, I'm just using my free speech. Then if that's what you believe free speech is, then all I'm doing is using the same exact right, whether it's God-given or constitutionally allowed or whatever. I'm just using the same thing that you are to tell you that I think you're wrong, or tell you that I think this is oppressive, or tell you that I think this is misogynistic, or whatever. And it's kind of that, that schoolyard bully situation of, you can dish it, but you can't take it. And you just got to wonder about people who, can't see, why can't you see that this is deeply, deeply, deeply offensive to people? Whatever you're saying, what happens when you say, oh, I'm sorry? Really, what happens to you when you say you're sorry? I don't know, because you've never done it, so I don't know. But that's the thing. I will often say, I don't live with regrets. I have almost zero regrets in my life, but I'm sorry about lots of stuff. But I won't ever be regretful that I said I'm sorry,
right?
Because I changed an experience for the better by saying I'm sorry, right? I don't have regrets that it happened. I'm sad that it might have happened, but I'm not regretful, and I think that's the big difference. For a lot of people, is they think that saying sorry is like an affront to their personhood. Mm-hmm. I don't get that, but that also might be the moral minority, the model minority thing pushing back on me, saying, "Oh, you have to say you're sorry," or maybe being Canadian, because I say I'm sorry a lot because I'm Canadian. I'm sure. Stereotypes. We'll get
so nice, so nice, you people.
Wow. I mean. It is really funny. We make a whole bunch of very, very biased opinions of people just off the get-go. Like when we talked about heuristics, if you are a gamer, if you are a martial artist, if you are a comic book lover, chances are I will like you immediately.
Yes.
Because those are all the things I like, and I'm awesome. And so I think I'm awesome. So if you like the things I like, you must be awesome too. This is a really very simplistic way of looking at the world, but we all do it. We all do it.
Yep.
We make these really quick judgment calls. And you see another person who's Hispanic, in line somewhere, you'll give them the nod, right? You give them,
or a bike or a cyclist.
Yeah.
The nod if I'm riding a bike.
Yeah,
and
because you're a cyclist, right? Yeah.
And like, and I running and I'm like nod, especially if we're going up a hill, like one person go up the hill, the other person's going down the hill, and like the other person's chugging along. You just like
because you know the struggle that they've gone through, right?
Yes.
and it's the same. Like it's why people will do things like wear logos and wear bands and things like that. If you see the same, you're in the group, you're in that tribe. The tribalism is very helpful in a lot of ways, but it's also very dangerous because we make assumptions based on, oh, you like the same things I like, so you must be a good human because I'm a good human. Dangerous, right? Just like, well, I mean, if we're going to roll it back to the incidents that happened, and this is horrible, right? Everybody's like, oh, he was a God-fearing Christian boy, went to church every Sunday, okay, great. He still killed 8 people. Going to church does not equate to being a good person. Really, it doesn't. I'm sorry to tell every Catholic Christian person, every whatever religion you are out there, it does not equate to definitively being a good person. It's definitely, you're on the way, probably.
Well, I mean, you might be led to be a bad person.
Yeah. Because there's a thing.
My heart as a Christian, but our church produces enough monsters on our own.
Right. And there's a
reality.
There's a big thing that in developmental psychology, it's called the moratorium, where you didn't choose; it was chosen for you, and that's often what happens with religion, right? It's like, did you choose to be Roman Catholic? I mean, I did not choose to be Roman Catholic. My mom's Roman Catholic, so I went to church every Sunday. I went to Roman Catholic school. I can recite the whole liturgy. I could probably put on a mass. That's how much church I've gone to in my life. Mm-hmm. But I am not Catholic. I was never baptized. It's actually a big sticking point for me that my mom sent me to a Catholic school without being baptized. This is where I learned that my friends think I'm going to burn in hell. They are no longer my friends, by the way. That kind of thing. It's like, wait a minute, just because I'm not baptized, you think I'm evil? And you think, so I have a very different relationship with organized religion, I think, because of my experiences. But my point being that moratorium, so the idea of development of identity through moratorium means that you actually weren't ever put in a crisis. You were never put in a crisis to make a decision about what you wanted to be. You just went along with it, or your parents chose it for you, or your culture chose it for you, right? So society often puts those things on us, where is this person a Christian or a Catholic? I mean, same thing in some ways, but not in others, I guess. I don't know. I get that a lot from my son will say, is a Christian a Catholic? I said, well, Ethan, yes. Sometimes Christians are Catholic. But are all Catholics Christians? Like, yes, okay, there you go. Now you've got it. But are they? So he keeps asking me these questions. And it's like, it's not that easy because he sees, I don't know why he sees Catholicism as distinct from Christianity. It's very strange to me. But anyway, that's another podcast, I guess. The idea anyway that you can do something without ever choosing to be that, and you can still be that thing. Right. Without making a conscious decision is very interesting. And it leads to things where we conflate, oh, because you are, go to church every Sunday, you must be a good person. You may not be. You may not have chosen. You may have, how much, will can you impose when you're a baby getting baptized? Not a lot. Right. Which is why oftentimes, people who are born again Christian will be baptized when they're older.
Works out differently.
Yeah, that works out a little differently. That's a different level of commitment. And I'm not saying that anybody who is baptized as a baby is not committed. That's obviously a lie or a falsehood. But there are definitely some people who aren't. There are definitely people out there right now who are baptized as kids who don't go to church at all anymore because they don't. They just don't want to. They don't believe in it anymore, but they were still baptized. Right. So it's an interesting thing how humans kind of develop and how people kind of get to where they are. And this just goes back to the whole massacre thing where you're hearing about, and this gets me, by the way, kind of sticks in the craw when, the communication is about the the killer.
Yeah.
Why is that important? Why are we spinning these semi these narratives that we are kind of sympathetic towards? Why?
Well, that was another thread. I think you commented on this about like there was a French person that chimed in at some point. It's like, well, people make stereotypes of French too. Like they erase French fries and call them French fries. So I know how it is.
Oh, oh my God.
I know how it is, and I know what the Asian. I feel the Asian community's pain. They rename my stuff too.
So so there was somebody in the game community who kind of went off this weird tangent where they said, and they're not French, by the way. They have a French last name, they have French heritage, but they're American. And like I, felt, kind of bashed and put down when, they changed the name of French fries to Freedom Fries in 2011 or whenever that happened. I don't even remember. And again, sorry, Suze, but this brings Suze back. Suze is like, you're comparing the death of, 8 people to French fries? Like, read the room, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Like, seriously. Again, this is not Oppression Olympics, but have some empathy for people. Like when you're communicating, if this is what this is all about. And by the way, this 100% goes back to game design. There is a school of thought amongst some game designers, myself included, that empathy is the number one skill that you need to design games. Because you need to understand where other people come from and how they play and play style and how they learn and how they think about content and how they derive fun, whatever that means to you. You have to be empathetic towards that if you are creating for people. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of designers who don't create for people, they create for themselves. And that's totally legit and that's fine. You might find some people who really like the things that you create because they're very similar to you or they like the same things that you do. But for those of us who work for other companies or who get hired to make specific games, we have to start thinking about, who's the audience? Who's actually there? And so empathy is a very, very big and important part of game design for me. And I have to tell you, as a therapist, I'm not an empathetic person. I was not really empathetic. It's weird because so Jason, as a behaviorist, you don't have to be empathetic.
You don't have to. No. I'm
And again, this is not something, that behaviorists out there are going to get on me. But it's true. You don't have to be empathetic. So it's why it actually behavioral sciences kind of was interesting to me. It's because it's very cut and dry and very scientific in a way, to a point where it's actually kind of abusive. That's a whole other podcast.
We're like laying the seeds of like Jason and Sen talk shop for like religion, psychology. So like tune in for that, or
someday.
Who knows what's gonna happen.
But anyway, the statement that was made it's just unempathetic, and I think that's another thing that people who are wondering why they're getting lambasted in posts or they're getting ratioed on Twitter is because you're not coming from a point of empathy, and people laugh. Somebody today on the Gen Con post. So this is another thing. There's a Gen Con post about when Gen Con decided that they were going to run their conference, their convention. It happens to be on Yom Kippur. Mm-hmm. And if you know anything about Yom Kippur, you know that it's not like Christmas. You know that it's not like Easter. You know that it's not the same as any of those. It really isn't. Like it can't be compared. And yet, if Gen Con announced that they were going to put it on Easter or Christmas, I mean, guess what the uproar would be? Mm-hmm. It'd be huge. But now you have, people who are Jewish not complaining, but just saying, hey, did you know that that's Yom Kippur? And Gen Con's doing something to, say, okay, how can we help people participate who want to participate? But Yom Kippur, and this is the other thing a lot of people don't understand about Judaism, is that it's not just a religion, it's a culture. It's a culture and a religion. Mm-hmm. And people who are secular Jews will still participate in Yom Kippur because it is part of the culture, not just the religion, part of the culture. Observant Jewish people will spend 5 days atoning. It's the period of atonement, right? So anyway, there was a whole lot of unempathetic people on that thread. They're not excluding you. You can come the other time. It's like they just didn't understand. A lot of it is bred from misunderstanding or not understanding or not knowing. And it is.
Well, it's bred from like, okay, you're using this cultural thing to take something away from me.
Yeah.
Like with the whole, like clapping back at the, an Asian person who is like saying stop Asian hate, whatever it is. Like, okay, you're going to use that hashtag to take away my Asian spell compendium, aren't you? And you're going to use that, I got accused of that when I was doing my, couple videos of like, okay, you're using these terrible things and now you're going to take away my, in that case, Game of Puerto Rico. And, there's that trigger of like, and in this case, it's like, okay, you're using Yom Kippur, which doesn't mean nothing to nobody. And you're going to take away my Gen Con now. And so that like loss aversion, like, I think it was, I don't know if it was before or on or off the call, you mentioned about loss aversion. Like
it was off the call, but it is a massive psychological driver.
It's probably in a lot of ways as a person who deals with a lot of anxiety, right? I mean, that like that loss aversion causes that anxiety. So like you're talking about where is it coming from? It's coming from loss aversion. And like, so that's what in a way it like frustrates me because it's like, oh my God, I'm dealing with the Leviathan of loss aversion. But it also kind of gives me hope because it's like, okay, we can deal with that. Let's figure out a way to like, okay, the Gen Con is the deity of Gen Con's a problem. Let's figure out a way to acknowledge this problem while giving people what they want. And that's exhausting. And like, there's a lot of people out there like, okay, no more pandering to this, like ignorant people. Let's just like honor people and whatever people.
Oh, and there's the other side too, that says, don't just pander to these special interest groups, right?
Everybody's pandering to something, So
I mean, they're a business, so they are, right?
Mm-hmm. So like, I mean, but like you mentioned before about empathy, like, I mean, doesn't that empathy kind of demand of us that like we try to figure out something?
I hope so. I would hope so, right? And that's the thing. I don't, I know a lot of people in the Jewish community were upset. I know a lot of Jewish people who are publishers who were like, we can't go. That means we're going to not make money. That means we're not going to be able to run our business, show our games, all that kind of stuff. Because they're observant Jews and they need to be doing Yom Kippur. They can't go. They can't. And the thing about Yom Kippur that, people don't understand is that there are a lot of restrictions of what you can and can't do during that period, right? It's not like Christmas.
It's like an extended Sabbath.
Yeah. It's like, okay, so Christmas, what happens? I go to mass.
You open presents in the morning and they do whatever, and then you watch football and basketball. Actually, in America, it's basketball. That's what you want on Christmas.
Yeah, but I mean, as Roman Catholic, what would we do? We'd go to mass.
As Roman Catholic, you go to you go to, well, it depends on like, do you go to the evening mass?
Yeah, you could go to the eve mass. You could go to the
vigil or whatever. There's all this is a smorgasbord of stuff.
But you don't have to. It's very different for Yom Kippur. And it's not like you're forced to, but
it is a holy day of obligation. But it
is a day of obligation, which is different, right? So anyway,
but it's one day. It's a couple hours. Like with Yom Kippur, it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing.
Yeah. And I just think like instead of reacting, go find out. Do yourself a favor. Learn about another culture. Learn about another religion. See the other side. Be a little more empathetic towards other people. Because it would help things go. And, about the person who said, French fries, maybe they had some point, but it just didn't come across very empathetically or come across well at all, to be completely honest. And some things maybe you don't need to say online. You don't need to tweet it out. Don't do it. Pass it through those 4 gates. Is this necessary? Is this truthful? Is it kind? Those things. Is it timely? And you probably find that one of those, it's not passing through that gate. If you're really critical of your own speech.
I really find that, because we're talking about like the loss aversion, right? I really find like that moderate, the idea of moderate backlash is like, so much of it is kind of slippery slope of like, if I stop this, then what's next? For now it's, the Washington Redskins, then it's going to be, like I can't, dragged off to the gulags and I can't think anymore. So what happens is, and this is what happens when you're not used to self-moderating, right?
Right. Or not used to having family who was interned or whatever.
Or yeah, so it's
Because
like,
I mean, if you think that's going to go to next up is the gulags, you got something coming, buddy. Because it's not.
right. And so like it's always, not always, but like very often it's like they feel the need to speak up because it's like, okay, let me nip whatever this is in the bud before it takes something, whether it's the thing now or whether it's the thing 5 things from now. Like we call it catastrophization. Like there's
Yeah.
it's
Oh, yeah,
instinct to catastrophize. So like that's what is leading them to say stuff. Not that we should accept that, but just to kind of understand what's going on and say, look, dude, you take it case by case.
Yeah.
Right?
And honestly, it doesn't come out from a racist point of view. A lot of that stuff, it is the catastrophization, right? It is that kind of whirling this up into this huge crisis that, oh my God, I got to say something. Otherwise this crisis is going to happen.
Right.
And it's not coming from a place of hate.
No,
it's coming from a place of loss and fear, which then may lead to hate. And unfortunately, what it often does is it emboldens people who do have hate in their heart to speak up. Or use data that they think is scientific and is not. That kind of stuff does happen an awful lot when people, try to put the kibosh on stuff like that. So it's an interesting thing. But Gen Con did a decent job of responding, saying, we understand that we made a mistake. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to try to do some things. And they weren't clear in our first response. So we wanted to make it very clear that we're not trying to exclude people. Here's what we're going to try to do. And they didn't really explain further than that, to be honest, but we'll see what happens next. But still, people, oh my gosh, we're like, why do we need to pander to this very small population? When the superpopulation, they called it, this one guy's, when the superpopulation is by far and large not Jewish. Maybe because we want them at the table? Maybe because we like them?
Because we're used to the superpopulation, quote unquote, being one type of person with one type of culture and one type of, and we're not used to the quilt. We're not used to the patchwork quilt, and we're still getting used to it.
It's such an interesting thing. So America, as you well know, being an American, is a melting pot, right? What do you think that means? What does that mean to you, Jason? What does melting pot mean to you? Being a person of color. Yeah, right.
Assimilation.
Whereas Canada, we call Canada a mosaic, right? And so Canada is very much a place where I feel very free to be Chinese, but also Canadian. But my point being that there is a real cognitive difference in terms of the thinking of what you think of your nation state to be, right? And how that then colors everything else that you do and everything else that you believe, in terms of even as simple as stuff as, will this convention run on this date or not? Right? Because if you look at it from an assimilationist model, it completely is that. Well, you didn't assimilate, so guess you can't come. Don't come. Whereas in Canada, we might actually have several different Gen Cons. I'm almost not kidding. But the one thing that separates, Canada from America, or not the one thing, but one of the major things is that teaching from the very beginning of, we are not a melting pot, we are a mosaic. And then you also think, like I said already, one of the other differences, we don't have free speech, we have protected speech. And then you get all these differences between our cultures, and you wonder why. So why are they different? They're very similar, but why? What are these differences about? It can't be just about a boot and a. It can't just be that. That's not the only difference. It can't be just poutine. It can't be just that. And saying sorry. Can't be just that in hockey. Can't be just that. Mm-hmm. It is from the very beginning. We are taught in school that Canada is a mosaic, right? That it is, indoctrination, if you want to call it that. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, like, people have this very funny sense of the word indoctrination. Like, indoctrination is bad, and well, is it? Is it, or is it just teaching? Mm-hmm. And it's only indoctrination when you don't like it, I guess. I don't know. Because I just think of it as teaching. Whereas, like, you could say that any religion indoctrinates you, because it does, right? Because it teaches you a way of living. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people talk about, dogmatic ideology, and like, I think like every ideology is kind of dogmatic when you,
Something,
if you really want to think about it, that's kind of the way it is. Even between,
like I'm a free thinker and you have dogmatic ideology is not going to work.
no, that's because
Right.
your ideology is that you're a free thinker in a lot of ways, and you're fooling yourself if you think you've not been, indoctrinated into something. Because, and it's a lot of times, people with more libertarian mindsets that talk like that, think like that, and they're not wrong in some ways, but they're also misguided in other ways, just like everybody else, right? There's no one truth out there, I don't think, anyways, other than be kind to each
Be kind.
other.
I was just going to say, be kind.
That's probably about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think as we kind of like wind down, I mean, I can't believe it. I had no idea what this was going to turn to, but then
I don't know. It just went off.
It was amazing. It was good. So I think like, I do want to like run with that Mosaic thing. Cause I grew up with that. Like I grew up in New York.
Yes, you would
right?
grow up with that because of where you grew up and who you grew up
I
around.
We call it salad bowl.
Yeah.
Right. So like it isn't, so like, we learned about melting pot, but then we learned like, because we are post-60s and the 60s in New York was very, multicultural and everything.
Yes.
So like we learned a salad bowl, like paradigm.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I guess like, that's kind of what I want board gaming to be. Right. And I think
salad. It should be a point salad.
A point
See,
salad
we can bring everything back to board gaming. It's fine. Yeah. But you're right. When you live in a culture that is de facto multicultural because of the space that you inhabit and the people around you, you can't be a melting pot.
Right.
It's hard. It's real hard to be a melting pot when there are so many first generation immigrants who don't speak the language well and who speak their native tongue much better and who create that space where that is allowed and still lives on and breathes on. And honestly, it's beautiful. Like that's the world I want to live in. I don't want to live in a homogenized world. I don't want that.
And it might be ugly, and it might be messy, and it might be like a lot of friction kind of getting there, but that's, we don't want to replace, we don't want to turn this into like SJW land of like no free thought. Like we genuinely want,
which I don't think SJW land really is, by the way.
Well, I mean, there's some people afraid of that.
Yeah.
But like, I genuinely, like, at least speaking for Sen and I, we want that multicultural space. And I think we're living in a time right now where one of the bits of salad or one of the pieces of mosaic are hurting right now.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes to really build that space, is recognizing with our empathy when one of those groups is hurting, and not saying like, now I'm Asian. Like I'll never say that. Or like, like we had that discussion, like, okay, or the people had the discussion, okay, Asian lives matter. It's like, well, no. Hold on. we got another one.
Yeah, like let's not co-opt movements.
Let's not co-opt movements. Let's not tokenize ourselves. And I know, like, I'm very conscious of that because I do, like, I want to try to be a multicultural person, but I'm like, doing that balance. But like, let me, like, at the end of the day, though, my brothers and sisters are hurting.
Yeah, whatever color they are, whatever creed they are, whatever. If people are hurting, we should probably do something about that, right? I mean, that's what being empathetic is about. That's the human experience that I want to have. And, it costs very little to be empathetic towards somebody. You'd think it would, but it really doesn't. And again, I mean, if you want to talk about the psychology of altruism, we're wired for it.
Right.
Yeah, we learn how not to be altruistic.
Right.
Through other things like capitalism and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, it's such a weird thing. Like little kids are super altruistic. They learn how not to be altruistic when they figure, oh, don't help that person. That'll mean that you don't get the spot at the kindergarten or whatever.
So like,
it starts so early. It really does.
I walk around with my 2-year-old, and we're walking in like the suburbs, right?
Yeah.
And New York, I mean, like America has this big idea about like property. And my kid doesn't care. He'll walk on anything and he'll knock on anybody's door. And I have to teach him. And I feel like I'm kind of like doing a little bit of violence to him. When I say don't walk here, don't walk there, don't walk there, like our divisions are learned.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It's interesting. If you ever have a chance to learn about anti-rambling laws, go ahead and look that up. It is surprisingly racist. Of course it is.
Surprisingly. Anyway.
So just as a very interesting hint, there's only so much land that you can freely walk on in America, and guess the 3 states that it's in, that the majority of that land is in.
What, the free walking land?
Yeah, land where you can walk, where nobody can stop you from walking on it.
Oh, geez. I mean, like Montana, South Dakota kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like Montana, Alaska, and I think either the part of the Dakotas or Utah, maybe. So it's anyways, it's barren and nothing's in it, and nobody would want to go there anyway, right? Anything else is like shot on sight if you walk on it type thing. And a lot of it is very racially based, and you should go find out about it. It's very interesting stuff. Your history is messed up, is all I'm saying. But this is like it is a lot of places. It is not dissimilar in other parts of the world.
But we can go off on another podcast about land use and rambling and all that.
Oh, for sure.
Yep.
It's fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, just read a book called Land on that very topic. So,
oh, did you?
Yeah, it was good. Cool. I'll link it to you. Anyway, so we will wrap this up on a note of empathy.
Yes.
Right. We will wrap this up on a note of, I was so happy to have Sen on. Thank you so much for like having the spoons for this. Like, and it's not like, I know we got sidetracked in the wonk, and that's all cool and everything, but like at the end of it, like, I love that. Yeah, I hope that people enjoy that too. But like at the end of the day, like this isn't something I'm going to take for granted. I think that a lot of people want to like kind of instinctively reach out to folks like, oh, like, like when they're in BLM, reach out to the Black people, which the Asian people, like do it in the right spirit, like ask them, give them the agency to kind of like either engage or not engage, as much as possible. But at the end of the day, reach out and try to connect.
And I mean, there's a real easy psychological theory of, if you just kind of draw rings around the person who's most affected and go like further out from that. Right. So I'm not American. That's good. I am not female. Also good. Right. So it's better to ask me about this than it would be to ask like an American who's also Asian and female, because they are really hurting right now. Like really, really hurting. Like I'm upset. They're scared for their lives. And rightly so. Like if things happen where this guy, I don't know, for some reason gets off, or I don't think that'll happen because he's confessed to the crimes, but if it's a really light sentence or something, or it's people are going to think that it's open season. Not necessarily that people who want to do harm will think it's open season, but Asian American women might fear that it's open season, right? And they already have fear because of all the stuff that's been happening because of the anti-Asian sentiment due to COVID.
And the 150% increase of hate crimes against Asians just in general.
Oh, in general, yeah. So, and I mean, that's an interesting thing in all of itself in terms of statistics. But yeah, so anyway, if you're going to reach out to people, just be kind, like really be kind. And do it from a place of compassion, as opposed to like, what's the word that I'm looking for? Well, even compassion porn, like, if you're doing it to view that through a compassionate lens, just don't view somebody's tragedy through like trying to be compassionate. It's kind of gross. But give people time, but if they are truly your friends, if they're really close friends, of course, you know them better than I do. You know when to reach out to them.
Sure.
But if they're, internet friends, I posted something on my page and a bunch of people have said, I'm with you. I'm sorry that happened. It's bad. And that was nice. That was good. It showed me that, okay, people have seen this thing. They know that it happened. They understand. But really, it wasn't for me. Really, it's for more, hey, you just be careful when you're talking to friends because who are Asian American. This will re-traumatize them entirely if they are traumatized. And there's a lot of talk on other places like Twitter and whatever, where there's a lot of Asian Americans just retelling their tragedies because that's what humans do in terms of storytelling, right? That's how we build memories. That's how we share. That's how we are compassionate towards each other. We share our stories. And so what you'll read right now on a lot of people on Twitter, if you follow a lot of Asian American people on Twitter, is they are telling the stories of when they were abused. And the thing is that they're telling it on their own terms. They're telling it when they want to. They're telling it on their channel where they can protect themselves, which is definitely different and better than you asking them in private or definitely in public. Don't do that. Don't do that. And it's a hard thing to say, right? Like it's hard to say, don't reach out. And I'm not saying don't reach out. I'm saying be careful when you reach out, or reach out to somebody who is adjacent to them. That's the ring theory, by the way, is the next ring out, right? So if you know somebody who is, especially, female Asian American, ask their best friend, ask their best friend's friend, and especially, but okay, if they're not Asian American, that's even better, right? Because you want to kind of get the idea that they're okay. You want to know they're okay, but really, you don't need to inject yourself into that life yet, unless they want you there, and they will probably ask.
And there'll be more opportunities. Like, unfortunately, this is the world we live in. Like, if you get it wrong once, there's going to be the next thing, next thing.
Yeah. No, and that's a really sad thing to say, but it's also true that, the things like ring theory in terms of asking people to talk about crisis, it's come up more in the last couple of months than it ever has in my life. And I'm a freaking therapist. This is my job, is crisis. And it's come up more in the last 2 years than ever, possibly because there's a lot of people in crisis right now. So just be aware that, one step away, 2 steps away if possible. The more removed a person is from the immediate crisis, the more they're going to give you the information that you need anyway, which is really, unfortunately, a lot of times it's really just to appease you. I mean, think about that. You can take that and sleep on that for a night, because sometimes it's not about the other person. Sometimes it's about you. And if you recognize that in yourself, that it's about, this is to appease me, you don't need to talk about it at all. Just don't. You don't need it yet, right? So just examine why you're doing what you're doing. Think about why you're talking about what you're talking about. Think about the 4 gates that I mentioned. You might have a deep-seated desire to know what's going on. But at the end of the day, if it traumatizes somebody to tell you that, think twice about doing it.
And no way for trauma to connect with somebody.
Exactly. That's the other thing.
Like put a pin, like when something traumatic happens, put a pin in that. And then when because time heals, time goes on. There will always be another time. There'll always be something else. And then use that time to learn, use that time to learn about the differences between, Chinese culture, Korean culture, Japanese culture, learn about, urban, rural, and all the, learn the salad bowl, learn the mosaic. And the good times, and then you'll find that you'll be more equipped to be a good friend and a good ally when it's needed.
The bad times happen. Exactly.
Sen, you are wise.
I don't think I'm wise. I just think about what I say.
We self-moderate.
Because we've had to all our lives.
Sen, this was amazing. We will please do not be a stranger to shelf stories.
No. Shelf Stories is one of the best findings of this 2021 thing going
Thank you.
Man.
I very much appreciate that. But you, please, you are welcome anytime. This was great. We're not going to talk about games. We're just going to talk about Sen. Where can we find Sen if we wanted to reach Sen?
Well, I do talk about games an awful lot where you can find me, but on Twitter, it's at SenFoongLim. So at Sen-Foong Lim on Twitter. And if you're interested in game design and things like that, come to Meeple Syrup. So on Facebook, it's the Meeple Syrup Shop Talk page. And it's a very curated group of people. Like, we don't let just anybody in. It's cool people only. So come on there. We do talk a lot about games, game design, from a designer's point of view, looking out from the inside, looking out in a lot of ways. So if you enjoy that kind of talk, come join us. We'd love to have you.
If you could change your mind, you could change the world. So until next time, later, everybody.